how it's presented. Okay, so that has made things both simpler for someone who wants to edit the information and more complicated, because the full body of what CSS can do is huge, and trying to do modern layouts and design in CSS is far more complicated than it was in the earliest days of HTML, when everything was just laid out in a simple table. So it's made things better and worse. Why it's made things better, though, is if someone already has a design set up, already has a style sheet created, the process of editing your content is now much simpler than it used to be, because we've separated all of the junk that used to be in your content in order to say how to display it, and we've removed it out of the content where it doesn't really belong into its own description. Okay, so I have on my screen right now a sample HTML file and CSS sheet, just to give you an example of what style sheets actually do when you're working with an HTML document. So here I have the most simple HTML document you can imagine. We always begin our documents with the HTML tag and end with the HTML tag. And we have two major sections of an HTML document, one being the head section and the other being the body section. The body section being where we put things that actually display to the user on their screen. I'm going to get into specific tags later and about HTML tags. For now, just know that this section here is the part of the document that's displaying on my screen right now, down below. Okay? This document does not have any formatting in it. It only has structure. So it has, this is an H1, which says that this is a heading. I have a P tag, which says that this is a paragraph. I have a UL, which is an unordered list, which says that these are list items, which equate down on my screen below as bullets. Okay? So all I'm doing is describing the structure of the document. And the display, as you can see, is very simple. There's nothing telling the web browser that I should use a particular font or a particular color or a particular font size or anything else about the document. Once I add a style sheet to the document, which I'm going to do right now, I have created a style sheet called test1.css. Oh, and I typed it wrong. Let's try test1.css. As soon as I did that, you can see that the formatting of my output changed. The font changed from a serif font into a sans serif font. My first level heading changed into small caps, even though, as you can see here, I have lowercase letters in my display. I am using small caps, and it's also changed the size of the font. If I look at my style sheet, this is where I'm actually describing that I want to use the sans serif font, how big I want my font to be. Here I'm saying that I want headings to be in small caps. And I can even go further now and reference other things in my style sheet, like saying I want this to belong to the green class, and amazingly, it will turn green. I could say that I want this to be a red header, and sure enough, it will turn red. Okay? So all of this happens when I connect my core HTML document, which again describes structure, how the information is organized, with my style sheet, which describes how to format that information. Okay, so that's the key thing that you need to understand about how modern websites are organized. That they have their HTML, which describes how the information is structured, and they have their style sheet, or many styles, which describe how to format and display that information. The amount of control that you have through style sheets is very, very extensive. To give you an example, this menu that you see here on the SEOC test site, if you can believe it, is an ordered list, an unordered list, which means it is exactly the same thing as this. That is how much control you have with a style sheet. I've taken what in HTML was just a list, so I'm saying here's a list, here are the list items, and with CSS, I was able to turn that into this menu, which does not look anything like the basic list. Okay, does anyone have any questions about the basics of, an HTML document and a style sheet, and what the purpose of each of those is? Okay. So you may have only one style sheet for an entire website. That's very common. Or you could have special styles for individual pages on your site. In the most simple case, and what I would recommend for, say, a basic website, you would have one style sheet that you would write for your entire site, and maybe you would bring a web designer in to do that for you. And then the only thing you have to worry about on a page-by-page basis is your content. You don't have to focus on making sure that your headings are read and your paragraphs are in the right font and all of that. You can know reliably that you're going to have consistent display of your information, have it looking nice and professional. The only thing that you have to think about is your content. So that's where you're aiming to go. And that's across all of the different kinds of activities that you're likely to be doing, whether you're working with your own website, editing the HTML in your record, creating a print template. The goal is all the same thing. You want to be focusing on your structure, so how the information is organized and the content of your information. And hopefully, either you have someone else to come in and set up your style sheet, or you can pretty easily do some basic things with style sheets on your own. And I will show you some of that today, and we can do another session specifically on doing style sheets if you think it would be valuable. Okay, so back to HTML and starting a new document. I'm working in Comodo Edit today. I will say right now this is not my usual editor, so I'm relatively new to it too, but all these editors work pretty similarly, so hopefully I'll be able to kick around in it okay. I've created a project called June 16 Project. I'm actually going to close it so that we can all start from the beginning. Okay. So I open Comodo Edit. It'll start with a splash page that you can close. If I was starting a brand new site or project, the first thing that I'm likely to want to do is actually create a new project. What is a project? A project is a collection of files that all belong together. So this is something that you want to create whenever you're working on a larger amount of content, like, say, a website. Okay? You do not need to create a project for a small, simple file. It just is not necessary. But if you wanted to create a new website, then a project gives you an easy way to organize all your files together in one place. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to create a new project that I'm going to call my test project. And I'm saving it in, I've created a folder in my documents called HTML Training to keep my project files. Okay. So I've got here's my project tab that I just opened here, okay? And I'm going to close up the one I was working with before, and I have my test project, and it's including my previous projects. I made them in the same folder. Within your project, you can create any number of files. I'm going to create a new HTML file. So I'm going to right-click my project, and I'm going to say Add New File. If you were not working in a project, you could also just say File, New File. Okay? You'll get the same dialog box, which will ask you what kind of file you want to create. In most cases, you're either going to be making an HTML file or a CSS file. We're not going to get into JavaScript or XML or any of those things at all at the moment, or PHP or ASP, or they're all related, but we're just going to stick to HTML and CSS. So I'm clicking on the web folder because that gives me all the files that are related to web activities. So we'll see here I have HTML and CSS. I'm going to click a new HTML file. I'm going to call this June16file.html. Okay? So what it's done is it's created me basically an empty HTML document which has the basic structure that every HTML document has. Preferably it's going to have this document type declaration at the top, not required. This tells the web browser what kind of HTML you are using. All right? So in some cases, if you fail to put this declaration at the top, the web browser doesn't know what kind of HTML version you are using because HTML has changed over time. And so it will make assumptions, and they may not be the correct assumptions. So having leaving in the doc type declaration that this is automatically putting in is a good idea. Next, we're going to have our HTML tag. That just tells us that this is an HTML document. Then we have our head tag, which is a container for information about the page that isn't directly displayed in the main browser window. So here I am looking in my browser. Everything that occurs in this window here is part of the body of the HTML document. There are other items that go in the head section, such as the title that you see up at the top of your web browser. And if you recall earlier, the other thing that I put into the head of my document was the link to my style sheet. Other things that could be in the head document could include links to JavaScript files, other style sheets. There's a special tag called a meta tag, which gives content to crawlers and other non-human being people who are reading your web page. Most of the time, though, where you will be working is in between the two body tags, which again describes that main block of content of your document. When you are setting up a template in Seoc, you can only enter the HTML that goes between body and end body. Okay? The rest of the content that's displayed by Seoc is automatically generated by the software, so you would never be putting HTML or head or title or anything else. The only thing you would be concerned about is what goes between body and end body, because the only thing that you're modifying is what displays in that main window of your browser. I'm going to send everybody through Lillian a PDF of a PowerPoint presentation I have that summarizes each of the HTML tags I'm going to talk about today, what they do and what they look like. So don't worry about remembering it. I'm also going to send you a link to the online reference site that I tend to use as my HTML reference if I need to, and it is the official one from the people that do the web, basically. They make the standards. They're called the W3 Consortium, as in www. And they have all of these official resources available to you for free that will explain to you how every tag, every CSS element, all of those things work. And they include tutorials. So this is a really fantastic reference for you to use when you don't know how to do something. It's not important for you to remember every tag under the sun and how it works. If you know you need to do something or you can't remember how a tag works, you can access a reference like this to help you determine what to do. So this really, you shouldn't feel that you have to remember all of these things, especially with CSS. You're never going to, and you don't need to. So the advantage of using an editor like this one is that it will assist you to a certain degree in writing your HTML. So if I know I want to write a heading, you can see this drop-down gives me a list of all the tags that are available to me. And as I start typing, I can see my tag in the list. So if I don't necessarily remember exactly what the tag and what to use is called, if you use a proper HTML editor, it's going to suggest tags to you, and that makes the process a lot easier. So I'm going to start out with one of the most basic tags that we have, and that is a heading tag. There are 6 heading tags starting from 1 to 6. And believe it or not, they get smaller as the numbers get bigger. So a first level heading is just like it would be if you were working in Microsoft Word. A first level heading means the most important heading, and a second level heading is is a subheading, and so on. So if I save this document, I now have the ability to click on the little globe and preview the file. And what? Previewing above now. So here I have the preview of my file up above, and you can see that the headings are getting smaller. That's the default, but basically the idea is that a heading 1 is the most important heading in your document. A second level heading would be a subheading within heading 1, and a third level heading would be a subheading within heading 2. The actual size of these, remember, doesn't matter because that would be controlled by your style sheet. In fact, I can make heading 1 be smaller than heading 3. What you're concerned about when you're writing these documents is about the structure. You're conveying the meaning of the information that you are that is contained in your document. Okay, so the fact that it's a heading 1 isn't about it being the biggest; it's about it being the most important. Okay, because it's very easy to make a heading 1 bigger or smaller or a different color. It doesn't matter what size it is. What you care about is that you're communicating the right structure of the document. Other than a heading, one of the most important tags that we will use is the paragraph tag. And a paragraph tag is the letter P. Okay, save this. And we'll see that under my heading 1, I now have a paragraph. If I want to make a new paragraph, I would simply do another and if the paragraph is very, very, very long, like I'm going to make this one, you'll notice in my screen above that the paragraph automatically wraps. So you don't need to be concerned about line breaks. That's something that is done automatically by the web browser. And in fact, if I were to put line breaks in the middle, I could potentially be making a very big mistake because the size of my screen is not necessarily going to be the size of somebody else's screen that might be this big, or someone else's screen that might be twice as big as my screen is. So we always have to be attentive to the fact that what I see is not necessarily what someone else is going to see. If I do need to make a single line break in the middle of a paragraph, so rather than a new paragraph, I just need a single break from one line to the other. That's done using break tag, a BR. Okay? Notice that rather than closing it, as you see here, P and NP, the BR tag is a single tag. It does not contain any content, whereas the other tags, they contain information inside of them. The BR tag and others like it that exist as a single tag don't contain any information. They convey a particular action or structure that is a sort of a one-off item. So in this case, a single line break. I'll save my file, and you'll see there's a single line break after that first sentence before the rest of the paragraph continues. However, as far as the document is structured, this is all one paragraph, which happens to have a single line break in the middle of it. Other examples of one-off tags would be an HR, which is a horizontal rule. A horizontal rule draws a single line across your page. You can change that line of the style sheet to be dotted or double line or pretty much anything you can imagine. You can change the width of that line to format it in any number of ways. But its basic purpose is to act as a delimiter between sections. So saying, you know, here is a single section, I'm going to cut that section off and begin another section. That's what I'm doing with the horizontal rule. It's a visual break from one section to another. So I was talking about how most of these tags are containers of information, meaning they have a beginning and an end, and inside those tags are the actual content that we're concerned about. Well, each of those containers some of those containers have structure associated with them, meaning that they actually imply some kind of default formatting, and other kinds of containers are just a way to literally contain information so that I can do something with it later. And the main container that has no structure is called a span. A span has on its own has absolutely no effect. So if I look up in my web browser here I put this inside this container, this span tag. But if I look, it made absolutely no difference to my display. So why would I put something like a span in my document? Once we bring styles into play, that becomes very obvious. For the time being, I'm going to put a style right inside the span instead of a style sheet so you can see what it'll do. I'm going to change the font face of this one section to span. I'll change the color, that's easier to see. I'll change the color to, how about red? Sounds good. Okay, save it. And you'll see that now that span has done something. It has a meaning. It contains some text and allows me to give some instruction to that piece of text, even though I haven't in any way changed the structure, the overall structure of the container, which is a paragraph. I have this other container which allows me to group some information and say that it has a special status, and I can then assign particular styling to it, or in some cases using advanced JavaScript and other things, I can actually manipulate that text and do other things with it. So that's why we have special elements like this that really are only containers. That's their only purpose, is to contain information. Another container that really doesn't do much of anything but has some structure associated with it is called a div tag. And in modern HTML documents, you will see a div tag a lot. They're just everywhere because they are so important to how information is structured now. Okay, so I've created this division here, and I'm going to put another one in. And I want you to see that they appeared on two different lines. If I did the same with the span tag, which I said has no structure, you'll see that they just run one right into the other. That's because a div is a container that has structure associated with it. Okay, it's a full layout element, more like a paragraph than a span, which is a container that is just a way to group a piece of information together. So these two tags, div and span, these are the ones that they make modern websites possible. They, if you look at the source of any modern website, you are going to see tons of divs and spans. However, as a person editing normal content, paragraphs, headings, lists, and tables are about all you are ever going to need. So although I want to highlight to you what divs and spans are for, because if you're editing an existing site, you're going to see them. In regular content that has meaning, you are not going to be using divs and spans, especially not divs. You're going to be using paragraphs for paragraphs, headings for headings, lists for lists, and tables for tables, and that's about it. So the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to send you outlines just those specific tags, because you can do 90% or more of the work that you need to do with just those items. So I've already shown you a paragraph and a heading. Now it's time for me to show you a list. There are three kinds of lists, but I'm going to focus on two first, and that is an ordered and an unordered list. So an ordered list means a numbered list. And the tag is, just like you expect for ordered lists, is OL. And individual list items are LI for list item. And I need to end my list. Okay, so you notice here's my container for my list, it's OL. And within my container for my list, I have individual list items, LI, that are contained, the content is contained between a beginning and an ending tag. I'll save it and we'll take a look. Because this is an ordered list, I have the numbers 1 and 2. Those numbers appear automatically. If I added 2 more list items, you'll see it automatically numbers them 1, 2, 3, 4. When working with an ordered list, I have a few options to change the structure of my list. And I do that using a part of an HTML tag that is called an attribute. You've seen me use an attribute before, right here. If you see where I added something to the style tag, that's called an attribute. And we're going to get into what attributes mean now. So besides the regular tags, which you've seen here, which have a less than symbol and then the name of the tag and then a greater than symbol, and when you're ending a tag, you have a / That's the structure of a basic HTML tag. When you start describing special characteristics of a tag, you use attributes. To use an attribute, we do a space after the name of the tag, and you'll see in my editor it's listing for me all the various attributes that I can be using with an ordered list tag, most of which you will never ever use. A class attribute makes a reference to my style sheet. An ID attribute uniquely identifies this tag. This is usually used in JavaScript so that if the JavaScript needs to get some information out of the document, it knows how to locate that information based on an ID that you have put into your document. And with an ordered list, we have a few special attributes, including the start at attribute, which as far as I knew would start at, but I am going to have this list start at the number 4. So instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, by adding the attribute called start with the value 4, which you'll see is contained in brackets, that's how we put the content of attributes, I've been able to change my list. Instead of automatically starting at 1, I have it starting at 4. Besides the start attribute, another special attribute of the ordered list is the type attribute. Right now I have the basic numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, but what if I wanted to use Roman numerals? By saying the type is I give instructions to the web browser that instead of regular Arabic numerals, I'm using Roman numerals. And you'll see I'm now starting at Roman numeral 4, 5, 6, 7. And in fact, I can change this to a capital I, and I will get them in capitals. And if I wanted this to be an alphabetical list, I could do a small letter A or capital letter A. And that changes how my list is numbered. Okay? So the two key attributes of an ordered list are the start attribute, which is if you want it to start at a number other than 1, and the type attribute, which is if you want it to be something other than your basic digits 1, 2, 3, 4, you can either have a lowercase a, an uppercase A, a small I, or an uppercase I for a Roman numeral. Any questions about an ordered list? Next, we have an unordered list. An unordered list is UL, for unordered list. But the rest of the structure is exactly the same as we saw for our ordered list. You'll notice instead of having numbers, I now have bullets, because these items don't have a particular order associated with them. I don't have a start attribute like I did with my ordered list, but I do have the type attribute. And instead of A, B, C, D, I have a few predefined bullet types that I can use. The circle, the disc, and the square. The default actually depends on the browser and how nested your lists are. But usually the first level is what you see here, which is called the disc. It's a filled-in circle. If I change the type to circle, you'll see I get an open circle. If I change the type to square, then I have a solid square. I'm sure you've been on websites that have other fancy bullets, and that is done through your style sheet. So there, what you can do with a style sheet is specify that the list bullet comes from a particular image, and that allows you to have an arrow or a colored dot or pretty much anything you want as an image instead of the standard bullets that occur when you're doing HTML. Next thing I want to show you about lists is that you can have lists inside of lists. So let's say list item 1 had a few sub-items. I'm going to copy my existing list, and inside list item 1, I'm going to put another list. You'll see me indenting my information, and you can see that Komodo Edit is very nice about showing you how your information is lined up. This does not matter at all. So the indenting that I'm doing and the way that I'm organizing my information is for me to be able to edit that information effectively. I could, in fact, have all my list items on a single line, and it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference. Okay? So the reason that we organize information in this way, with it indented and nicely lined up, is for the person who has to look at and edit this code later. HTML doesn't care. Okay? So you'll see I've put a list inside another list. What I did was, instead of ending the list here, I used to have the end list item here, I said inside this list item is another list, another unordered list. And inside that unordered list are these 3 list items. So you'll see that I have my original list item, and inside that I have the sub-items that I have put underneath list item 1. And then when I'm finished, I'm ending my original list item before I go on to the rest of my list. Top of for numbers. Nice for goodness. So you'll notice that the browser has automatically changed the bullet, and I had said that it depends on your browser what the default type of the icon is. The browser, by default, will automatically change the type of bullet at each level that you indent. So if I decided that I wanted to go one further, and inside this list item 2, I'm going to add another list. Okay? So instead of ending list item 2, I'm putting another list inside that and then ending it. You'll see now it's using the square bullet to differentiate the levels. If I override the type, like I showed you earlier, you'll see that I can have disks at all levels. Okay, so that was just the default of what the browser does, is change it at each level to be a different icon. Okay, any questions about lists? And again, I have this all documented in a PowerPoint presentation that I will give you. So you will be able to see right in front of you what this looks like. So, and you'll also have this video. So please don't worry about, I can't remember what that tag looks like or what it's called, because you will have something on paper to see it. Is everyone there? Okay. Good. Just want to make sure silence is because no one can hear me. Okay. So that is how a list works. And there was one other item that I said was something that you were likely to want to use on somewhat of a regular basis, and that item is a table. Tables are probably, in the old days of HTML, tables were the more complicated element that people had to deal with. And actually now, in modern day, tables are the easy way out for people who don't want to deal with complicated formatting with style sheets. How times have changed. I'm going to get rid of most of my list junk here so that we have less to work with. Okay. And I'm going to create us a new table. So here we go. I'm going to make a new section. I'm going to say this section is the table section. And I'll write myself a paragraph. Just so you can see how all of these things go together. So I'm going to now create a table, and shockingly, the tag is table. Okay, so we have our beginning of our table. Every table that we create has rows and columns. And the first thing that we always do when we create a table is create a new row. And a row is TR for table row. Within our row, we can specify either table headings or table TDs is a table column. So in this case, I'm going to give my table a heading. And I'm going to do it with TH, which is table heading. So, and I'm going to say that my particular table has 2 columns in it, so I'm going to make 2 headings. And for the time being, I'm just going to end my row, end my table. And what I'm going to end up with is a table with a single row. You see TR and TR, that's a single row. And in that single row of my table, I've created 2 headings. I'm going to save it. We'll have a look. Oh, and I've not ended the tag properly. There we go. That's one thing I did wrong. Table, TR, TH. What don't you like? This may be me conflicting with Komodo Edit. We'll see. It may not like tables in its display. Well, I'm previewing a browser. I'll show you at some point. So the configured browser is what I have below here. You'll see in my drop-down I also have Firefox and Internet Explorer. Now I'm going to choose Firefox. And I'm going to take a look at, I missed something here. Now you get the fun of seeing HTML debugging. Isn't that fun? Table row, table header. Ah! That's all. Oh, it was that simple. Okay. Believe it or not, this isn't a table. Why doesn't it look like anything? Okay. Well, the first thing that I have to do to make my table look like a table, I'm going to add an attribute called border. So now this actually looks something like a table because I have a border around it. And likewise, if I reload in my browser, you can see now it looks like a table here as well. Now that we have, we can clearly see our table, I'm going to add another row to the table using TR. And this row isn't going to be a heading, it's going to be the actual content of my table. So I do that using a tag called TD. That's our column tag. I'm going to call this column 1. And because this is a 2-column table, I'm going to also have column 2. And then I'm going to end my table row. Save it. So you can see that by default, my headings are bold and my regular columns are not. What you can't see here is that table headings are actually centered. So I'm going to shorten the title of my heading here quite significantly. And lengthen the text of my column so that we can see that table headings by default are both bolded and centered, whereas, as you can see right here, our regular table cells by default all indent to the left and are not bolded. Again, this is all changeable with the style sheet. If I want to make another row where my 2 columns table, I have a cell that spans both columns, I can do that as well. So I'll do TR as my new table row, TD because I want to make a column, and then I'll say I want to span 2 rows, and I do that by or 2 columns. I do that by saying call span equals 2. Then I'm going to end my row. So again, what I've done here is I've created a new row with a single column in it that spans 2 columns. And if I look at my content, you can see that here I have a column that goes across the width of 2 columns. Likewise, I can also span 2 rows. And I do that using row span. Now, what's important to know about the row span column is I need to fill in the gap. If I do this now, I want you to see what happens. You'll see that right now I'm missing another. If you see, this is not looking correct. So what's the problem here? I want this to span 2 rows, but it's not. Obviously it's not working correctly. So what's happening here? So when you want to span 2 rows, you have to sort of fill in the blanks of the other places that you want your information to go. So in this case, I need to have 2 columns that fill in the gap of that particular row that spans 2 columns. So I actually need a column directly next to that column, and then I need another row after it that instead of having 2 cells, it's only going to have 1, because the row before it spans 2 columns. So in that second row, I only needed to put 1 cell instead of 2. Because the column I said this is very tall already took up the space of the first column in the second row. Those are the absolute basics of a table. What we have is we can do a heading, which is a TH, a table heading. We can do a table cell, which is a TD tag. We can give our table instructions to span more than 1 column using call span. And we can give our cells instructions to span more than 1 row using row span. Now, most editors, and I don't know if Komodo Edit does, but most editors will give you an automatic ability to build a table so that you don't have to do this grunt work that I have just done. I'm going to give you an example in my editor. I know in my editor, I can click my table button, and I can say that I want a table with 5 rows, 2 columns, how big of a border I want, and whether I want a heading on the table to the left or to the top, and it will automatically generate, you'll see, the TR and TDs for me. Okay? If you are using a more advanced editor like this one, the other major advantage I have to save this to preview it. Pardon me while I save this somewhere. Oh, there we go. I'm not previewing this because it's not in the body tag. if you have an editor like this that is a bit more advanced, you can do things like say that you want to merge your cells, and it will automatically insert the call span for you. So although you can do these things manually, if you have a more advanced editor, it will automatically take care of this in the exact same way that you would deal with it if you were working with Word or any other document editor that isn't HTML. It's the same theory. And all the same theory of how you organize the information applied. In terms of merging cells and row span, behind the scenes, they are all the same thing. Okay? So, does anyone have any questions about tables? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I just, before you couldn't hear me, so I just wondered if you could hear me now. Never mind then.
I can, yes. I heard you perfectly there. Okay. So, the use of tables really is often very discouraged in modern development, except where you really do have what we call tabular data, so the kind of thing that you would put in a spreadsheet or something like that. That said, the honest truth is a table is the easiest way to lay out information, and if you have to do it that way, then do it that way. Often people will just beat their heads against a wall trying to lay their information out in columns using style sheets, and that is not easy. It's possible, but for novices, tables, don't make tables your enemy. They're not your enemy. They're very easy to work with comparatively. So don't worry about using tables, and if you run into someone who says tables are not the way to do it in the modern world, we use CSS, that's absolutely true. But if you can do it easier in tables and it looks good and you're happy with it, then go for it. That's my personal advice. Tables are a really easy way to lay out information. And though, yes, we do prefer that you use tables for their true structural purpose, which is tabular data, and not to do layout. If you need to do your layout using a table and it works well, then do it. That's my 2 cents. So that's the basics. Honestly, that's it as far as HTML. If you know how to use those tags, you are pretty much set. The one thing I haven't mentioned, which is a formatting, it's 2 formatting items, in fact, that you will often see used in descriptions, in text. Oh, and I still have to get into links and images, but that's a whole other thing. The one formatting thing that I'm going to explain to you that you can do with a style sheet, but people will do as a structure element, are what we call strong or bold and emphasis or italics. Okay, so we do have HTML tags called B for bold and I for italics. However, the preference is that we use their structural counterparts, which actually impart the purpose of the tag that you're using. So the reason that we use a bold tag is because we want to give strength to the piece of text that we are making bold. So if I say strong, you see it's bolded. The reason I'm using strong, again, is because that makes this something that describes the meaning of the content, whereas using the bold tag is just a formatting element. And we really want to keep our formatting in our style sheet, not in our documents. Whereas the word strong is making a point about the fact that that particular section of the information is important, okay? So it needs to be highlighted from the rest of the text, and that's why we're going to use the strong tags to bring that information forward from the rest of the text. And the default way that that happens is with a bold. But as with everything else, I can change the structure of the strong tag or the style of the strong tag to do any number of things. I could make it purple, I could make it underlined, I could make it, pretty much anything you can imagine. The other one that we use is called the emphasis tag. And again, this is the case where you want to emphasize a particular piece of text. The effect, the default effect, is italics. However, we don't use the italics tag that we could use because what we're trying to convey here is meaning, that particular section of text has an emphasis to it. It has more meaning, and that's generally what we're trying to convey when we use italics. And if we just want to make a section of text italicized, then we should be doing that in our style sheet, not in our basic HTML. Okay? So those two special formatting tags, again, are the strong tag, where you want to call out a piece of text as being more important, and the emphasis tag, EM, where you want to put emphasis on a particular section of the text. And the end result of those are bolding and italicizing the text by default. Okay? So the last two things that we need to get into in basic HTML, which are very different from the document structure that we're describing here, are links and images. And those two things are very tightly related to each other because they both refer to information located elsewhere. So before we can understand how to use links and images, we have to understand how we reference one document from another document. And pardon me for 1 second, I just need to wet my palette. Okay, so this process of identifying the location of one document from another document is referred to as either absolute or relative linking. For the most part, when you're working in something like SEOC, you'll be used to doing absolute linking in a case where you're linking to a website that's located somewhere else other than SEOC. Okay, so that's when we use absolute linking. When the location that we want to go to is not on our site, but it's located on another site somewhere else. All right? And an absolute link always contains what we call the protocol. Most of the time, I've got a great example here. Most of the time, the protocol is HTTP // okay, which you've all seen before. Sometimes, when you're working in a secure site, the protocol is HTTPS, which is secure HTTP. And sometimes, as we see here, where I'm viewing a local file on my computer, the protocol is file. And there are other protocols like FTP, and in the olden days there were even more like Gopher and all kinds of things that you'll never have to worry about. 99.99% of the time, what you are going to have is HTTP, just your plain old HTTP. And you need to put that in front of any website address that you use in your document where that document is located somewhere other than your own website. So the same website that you are currently working in, if it's anywhere else, then you need to use what we call an absolute link, which is the full address right from the protocol, which is this section here, all the way through the entire address, including the file and any other piece of information that you have about the location of that file. When you want to link to a file that is on the same website, you use a technique called relative linking, where you specify where a file is located in relation to where your current file is. So using the example I have right here, I'm in my local SEOC site. I'm currently on the start.asp page. When I link to, let's say, the feedback page, which is called revfeedback.asp, I don't have to write http://localhost SEOC revfeedback. All I have to say is revfeedback.asp because that file is located on the same place in the same folder of my site as the current file. So I'm going to demonstrate this to you just by taking a quick look at the HTML on this page. We'll go to my feedback link. Okay. So here we have, this is a link in my page, and you'll see that I'm not saying http://localhost revfeedback.asp. I'm just saying revfeedback.asp because I'm going to a file that's on the same site and same folder. I don't need to tell the web browser the whole website address. However, if I go to this link down here, where I say this database runs on Seox software, pardon me, I'm having interference here. I can't get to my, that's going to help me. There we go. Here I have this database runs on Seox software. Well, the Seox website is located in a totally different place from my local address, which is localhost, okay? So here I have an absolute address, http:// and the entire Seox website address, okay? And that's because the Seox site is in a completely different location from where I am now, which is localhost Seox. Finally, we have an in-between case where the file is located on the same site but in a different folder, okay? That is another form of relative linking. And the case I'm going to give you an example here is the volunteer menu, because right now I'm in Seox start.asp. If I wanted to go to the volunteer version of my software, I would have to type in the word volunteer here because it's in the volunteer folder, okay? So the volunteer folder is on the same site as localhost Seox, but it's in a different folder. So I have to tell my web browser, first go into the volunteer folder, and then go to the file start.asp. Right? So that's a different form of relative linking. I'm going to show you a few different ways that a relative link, what a relative link can look like. So I'll go up to the top of my file here, and I'm going to take some links here, and I'll create, the way that we do a link is with an anchor tag, and that is the tag's name is called A. And the way that we specify a web address location is with an href, an HTTP reference. Okay, that's what href stands for. And we're going to start off with an absolute link to Seox. And we're going to say http:// which is our protocol that tells the web browser, I want to link to a site that is located somewhere different from where I am right now. Okay. So there's our first example. And if I click that, it's going to Seox. Okay. The next example I'm going to do is a file on the same site. Now earlier today, in this same folder, I had created a file called test1.html. Now because that file is in my same project, in the same folder on my computer, I didn't have to put http: or even file : since this is a file on my computer and not a file on the internet. Okay? And when I click here as test1, it brought up that example that I showed you earlier, which is located, if we go back and forth, I was in file : blah, 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 June 16th file.html, and if you watch what happens when I go, here is test1, I'm still in exactly the same folder with all of this part of the web address being exactly the same. The only thing that's changed is test1.html. Okay? So that means that the only thing that I had to put to tell the web browser where to go was test1.html. So let's say that I create a brand new file, and the location of that brand new file is somewhere closely related to my existing location, but not quite. So I currently have my HTML training directory. Let's say that I saved June 16th file, and I'm going to make a new folder within HTML training, and I'm going to call it new folder. And I'm going to save this as June 16 file 2 inside new folder. If I want to link to new folder, I have to go first into new folder. I'm already in new folder. You see, I'm working in new folder. I've saved this in new folder. So to get to my old version of test1, I have to go up a folder, meaning get out of new folder, and then go to test1.html. So I'm going to refresh this. And now when I click on this, I have to go, first I have to go preview in browser. Make sure I'm in. Let's make sure which file I have open. Yeah, June 16 file 2, okay. So I need to preview this. Not going to where I want to go. Pardon me again, this is me struggling with the new editor. June 16, file 2. So now I'm in new folder, and my link to test1, which was not inside new folder, you'll see the HTML training part stayed the same, but the new folder part went away. And the way I made the new folder disappear was with that ... Okay, the ... means go up a level. If I was working in my original June 16 file, which I'll open right here, the way that I would get to my new file would be, I would first go into new folder, and then I would go into June 16 file 2.html. Okay, so in new folder, when I click on it, look where I am. Right now I'm in the HTML training folder. If I click in new folder, it's now in the new folder and then the June 16th file 2. To get back to test1, this link here is using the ... To go back a level, you'll see new folder disappeared, and now I'm in test1. Now, the way to get around having to do things like jump from new folder to ... and all of this more complicated relative linking is to just put all your HTML files in the same folder. If you don't have a gigantic site, you don't particularly have any need to divide all your files up into many different folders. I do recommend putting all your images in one folder, all your PDF documents in one folder, all your style sheets in one folder. But for the most part, if you just put everything in one folder, then the only thing you're going to have to specify is the name of the file and not be jumping around all over the place trying to figure out how to link to something that's located in a different spot. If I follow my own advice and make myself a styles folder and an images folder, and so on. The nice thing about that is it just means that I would have to put, styles, and then the name of my style sheet, I'm never going to be linking from the styles directory back into my regular HTML. So it's still really simple and easy to deal with. When you start getting into problems as if you have a whole bunch of folders for your HTML documents and trying to link between those starts to get a little more challenging. If you have to, just use the absolute link. It's not the best thing in the world because if your domain name changes or you move your site somewhere else, then your links don't work anymore. So relative linking is great because it makes your site portable. And as an example, your web address, seoc.communityconnectiondevelopment.com, at one point, whoever was managing it didn't know to change it, and we couldn't find anyone to change it, and you had to get a new website address. Well, if that had happened with your actual website, and you had put all absolute links in with the HTTP, you would have had to go in and edit every single file in the site to fix all those links. With relative links like this one, it doesn't care what your original website address is. It's going to work no matter what, because all it cares is that that file is located in the same folder as the other file. It doesn't care whether the web address is communityconnection.net or communityconnection.com. It doesn't care. And in fact, if you end up having both those addresses active, the site will work equally well in either case. So in most cases, what you want to be using is what we call that relative linking. Within your own site, you do not include the HTTP. Now, what I often find is a mistake that people make in the description of their SEOC documents, if they're trying to cite a web address, is they will forget the HTTP and just put in www. whatever site. If you don't put the protocol in, the web browser will think that this is a file on your website, and that link will not work. If I click on that, it's going to look for a file named www.seoc.ca, which obviously I don't have, and when it doesn't find it, it's going to give the person looking for the file an error saying 404 not found, and that will be a broken link. So often that's a really simple mistake that people make, is forgetting that HTTP in their links if you're linking to an external site. I know that the whole relative absolute can get a little bit messy, but does anyone have any direct questions on relative and absolute linking? Okay, so this whole concept of linking, as I said, this applies to a few different areas. The first is very obviously links between pages, which we've already covered, which we're going to use our anchor tag for, and then our href, our HTTP reference, which tells us where to find the file. So the anchor says, I want to make a link, and the href says, this is where I want to make the link to. Okay. Besides just links, those the concept of absolute and relative linking is used also when you are creating images and when you are linking style sheets or JavaScript files or any other files that you include in your site. So the next example I'm going to use is my style sheet. So I'm going to link up the style sheet that I had created earlier, and interestingly enough, we're going to use that href again. And because my style sheet is located in the same folder, test1.css, that's all I have to do to link it. I'm going to tell my browser what kind of a link this is, and in this case, the type is style sheet, or type equals style equals type equals text CSS. So this, the format of linking, I don't even have this memorized and frequently go back and remind myself how to do it. So this isn't something you need to memorize. The only thing you need to be able to do is copy this link in place and change the name of the file. So what this does is very simple. It figure out how that works. No. In fact, I forget so often that I'm going to have to go in here and remind myself how to link a style sheet. That's how often I do it. Well, style sheet. Yeah. Oh, almost correct. The style sheet. Did I link it with the wrong name again? Yes, I did. Test 1. There we go. So there we go. I've applied my style sheet. The same linking applies. So in the case of, say if you're setting up a design template on the SEOC site and you want to link to your style sheet that is located on your website, you would have to put in the full address. So if I'm going to set up general setup options, or sorry, design template, and I have my little spot to specify my style sheet, it's assuming the HTTP because you have to find the spot for your style sheet to live, and then you provide the full web address of your style sheet, and it's going to do that linking for you automatically. In the case of designing a website like I'm doing here where you need to link the website, this is the format that your link is going to take, and the only thing that you're going to need to specify is the location and name of the file. Right now my test1.css is in the same folder. If I said, well really this should be in the styles directory, then I can move my test1.css into the styles directory and link it as styles test1.css, which would do the same thing. Okay. Finally, we have images, and images work exactly the same way. Right now I don't have one in my project, so I'm going to link to some random image on the web. Let's see what's a nice image. Let's do a Google image search. Oh, that's a lovely one. Okay, there we go. I found an image. I like this image. That's lovely. The location is right here. I'm going to take, because this is on an external site, I'm going to take the entire link, including the HTTP, and I'm going to start my image tag. Image tag is another one of those tags that, because it's a single occurrence, it doesn't have a beginning and an end. I'm going to say the image source. You see this is different from the href. Source is HTTP, and then I need the entire address here. There's the address to the flower. That's it. Save, preview. There's my flower. Okay, so again, all I did here was I used IMG as my tag. We used source instead of href, which specifies the location of the image. If the image was on your own site, then you could do relative linking. Optionally, if you know the width and the height of your image in pixels, it's a really good idea to specify it because it makes the browser load the page faster. It means the browser can create a placeholder for your image and continue rendering the page until it has time to go and download that image. So with big files particularly, it's a really good idea to specify the width and the height of the image. It will make the page load faster for the person who's viewing it. So in this case, I can find out the size of the image. Just by looking at it in my web browser, I can see that it's 317 by 324 pixels. Okay, I'm seeing that right up here. Also, if you right-click, I'm in Firefox, and I can view the properties of this image, and it will tell me the image dimensions, 317 by 324. Okay, so there's many ways to find that out. I'm going to now add that width and height to it. So 317, and the height was 324. And I'm going to save it. Okay. If I get the width and the height wrong, let's take a look at what happens. Squishes it. Never, 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 ever resize your images this way, because the size of the file is still gigantic If you have a giant image and you want to have a small version of it, let's say, oh, I want a really small flower. So I don't want it to be 300 by 300. I want it to be 100 by 100. And I save it, and I think, oh, look, there's my lovely little flower. I made it nice and small, except that actually you didn't make it nice and small. Two things have gone wrong here. One, the person who has to download that image still has to download that great big image. And two, when a browser resizes an image for display, it does a much worse job of it than your photo editing program will. So the result is not going to be as high quality as if you had resized that image properly in a photo editing program. So although you can change the width and the height of the image using HTML, you shouldn't do it. You can also change the width and the height using CSS. Because it's a formatting element, you have that same control with CSS as you do with HTML. The only other things of note for images in a general case is the border element. The border element becomes really important only when you link your images. So I can add a border to my image, really as big as I want. Right? I have a nice big black border around my image here. So I can force a border around my image. However, the main issue that we run into is as soon as we link an image, so if I put a link around this, I'd like you to see there's a blue link colored box around this image right now. By default, if you link an image, it will put a box around the image that is the same color as your link color. In this case, a visited link color is blue. So it's put a blue box around my image, which usually is not what you want. And the way that you get around that is by saying that the border is 0. And the image goes away. So it's still linked, but there's no border hanging out around the image to look sloppy. That's it for images. Images are, again, very, very simple. You can put alignments on images such that if I wanted them to, the text to flow around an image, for example, I can put an alignment on an image, and you'll see now my text flows around that image. I can change that alignment. Instead of having it be left, it can be right, and then it would be on this side. I can also add horizontal and vertical space around an image. However, the better way to do this is with a style sheet. It can be useful, though, so I will show you. Okay, so here I've just put some extra white space around it so that the text can't get too close to the image. Is there any other questions about images and how they work? They're just like any other piece of text, so you can treat them like a paragraph or a heading in that you can put links around them. You can put spans and divs around them. You can control them the same way that you can any other element within an HTML document. And that honestly is it for HTML. That covers 90% of what you would need to do in a regular day-to-day kind of work with HTML. As I say, you can take this to a whole other level if you want to, but in most cases, it's just not necessary to do that. Usually what you have is someone else has done a template for you with your menu and your style sheet and everything, and all you need to be able to do is edit the content of your document, the part in the middle that actually has the meaningful text in it, And you can pretty effectively ignore all the other formatting they've done and just edit the piece of the text that's actually relevant to what you're doing. And in terms of adding to your CR site, if I want to add content to the menu, and I wanted it to be in a bulleted list, or I want to make a nice fancy footer that displays at the bottom of the site, that can be done with just the most simple HTML. You don't need to have very much knowledge in order to do that, and certainly you don't need knowledge of things like forms and JavaScript and all of those things. So that's why I'm not covering those. If you have Once you have a grasp of just the basic working of HTML, if you want to get into things like building forms and so on, hey, that's great next step, but I would anticipate that you can do the majority of what you want to do just understanding those basic things that I covered today, which is your headings, paragraphs, the break, which does a new line, your BR tag, your list items, ordered list and unordered list, tables, images, and links. And that's it. That's going to do almost everything that you need to do in terms of content. So the next thing that you need to understand is how does this work with the style sheet? Because obviously just your basic HTML is pretty darn dull. And if you want to do something that looks good and looks professional, then you need to have more than just the structure. You need to have formatting associated with that structure. Oh, I've got a question popping here. Oh, that's your earlier question. Sorry. Yes. I didn't notice it flashing till now. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about CSS and what a CSS file looks like and what we do with CSS. And as I say, you could do an entire session just on CSS and how to work with CSS. So I'm going to just be pretty brief about what CSS is and how it works. And there will be some information in the PowerPoint slides I'll send to you as well. CSS is a way of describing how you want to format various pieces of your document. You identify pieces of your document in one of several different ways. One, by the name of the element. So in this case, you'll see I have the body element. Here I have the H1 element. So when I make a change to those, I would be saying that everything inside the body tag has the font family sans serif, which is pretty much like Arial, Helvetica. I can do a whole list here. And I want the font size. In this case, I'm using a font size called EMS. EMS is a particular way of describing the size of a font. There are many ways that you could describe this. You can describe it in inches. You could describe it in pixels. You know, many ways that you can describe the size of a font. The most accepted way of describing font size is generally with EMS, which is why you see me using M here. You can also describe the size of a font in relation to its default size. So here I'm saying that the size of all of the text contained in the body tag, the default size is 0.9 M. And M is actually literally in relation to the size of a letter M. Sort of a weird thing. It's something to do with just graphic design field and the way they do typography. So I would then say that in relation to the default size, I want an H1, a level 1 heading, to be 130%. So it's going to be 30% bigger than the default size. In this case, I'm also saying I want a font variant that turns that text from whatever case it currently is in into small caps. Okay? What does this look like? Let's open up our document and see. I'm going to use my test 1 HTML that I had up earlier. I'm going to preview it. I am referencing right now my test1.css style sheet. You'll notice that right now all my text is a sans serif font as specified in my style sheet. If I change this to a serif font, let's say I don't want all my body text to be sans serif. I just want my heading to be sans serif. Let's say even both my headings, H1 and H2. Save it. Take a look at this preview again. Now I have serif font, meaning, is there anyone who doesn't know what serif font means? Serif font just means basically the little feet at the top and the bottom of all the letters, as opposed to a sans serif font doesn't have those little, I call them little feet, whatever, the little sort of folded edges of the font. So here you can see now only my headings are in that small caps Arial that I specified, and the rest of my text is still in serif font. Okay, and it's that easy. I change it in one place, it applies to my entire document. So again, that explains how we reference things by their tag names. So in this case, the body tag, the H1 tag, the H2 tag. Besides that, we can apply a class name to a specific element in our document to say that element has some special status different from the default. So I'm going to add the class green to this particular heading. So I'm going to say the class of this heading is called green. Within my style sheet, I have noted dot green, okay? That dot indicates a class name, all right? And anything, in this case, anything that has the class name green is going to have the color, this particular color is an HTML color, it represents dark green, okay? And so you can see above here that my heading, which had applied the class green, has turned green. One thing to note here, I'm going to make a change so I can demonstrate something to you. I'm going to apply the green class to another element, to my other heading here, so that both my headings are green. And now if I refresh, both of my headings are green. However, in this case, I put H1 in front of the class name, so it says H1.green. That means this particular style is only going to apply if the class is green and the tag is H1. All right? So this particular style I've applied has what we call a pseudo class called hover, which means that when I hover over something, it applies the style. So if you see, when I hover over H1, the color changes. So when I put my mouse over, it changes to a very, very dark green. Whereas if I put my mouse over H2, which also has the class green, nothing happens. Because in this case, I said that only the H1 with the class green is going to have this attribute. If I take out the H1 and save it, reload my page, now they both do it. Okay? So not only can you specify a class name, you can say that different classes are applied to different elements behave differently. So I can say dot green, I could say H1.green is this color of green, and every other kind of green is going to be an even lighter color. So I'm going to say it's going to be a really, really light green. And now if I refresh my document, even though they both have the class green, the H1.green is going to take this particular style, and everything else that isn't an H1 that has the class green is going to take this one. Okay? You can see the difference. They both still do the hover, which isn't applied to a particular element name. So the class name is just one component. You can group together the element names and the class names so that you can be very specific about which portions of your document have which kinds of formatting. Now, in a most basic style sheet, it's frankly enough to just say, I want my headings to have one kind of font, and I want the rest of my text to have this other kind of font, and that's it. And often and maybe a color for your headings, and that's enough to make your document look much more professional. So compare this to if I take that document and take my style sheet out, what a difference it makes, even though really the content of my style sheet is so extremely basic. I'm not doing anything exciting whatsoever with my style sheet, but even though I've hardly done anything, it does make a very significant difference to the perception of the way the content is displayed. Okay? And these style sheets are the same ones that you can then apply to your print template or your CIOG site or your website, any of those things. And in fact, you can create one style sheet for your website and use it over again for your CIOG site or your print template or anything like that, so that they all have a really consistent formatting. And you've only had to do that work one time. And you can reuse that style sheet over and over and over again to give all of your content the same look and feel. Okay. I want to show you one more way that we use, or one more way that we access information in style sheets, and that you'll see here is this hash mark. This is how we refer to elements with an identifier, an ID. Each element in an HTML document can have an ID associated with it. An ID can only be used once in a document. So if I'm looking at my test 1 and I said, okay, this H1 has the ID, my first heading, I couldn't then say that this H2 also had the ID, my first heading. It has to be different. So this would have to be my second heading. Okay? In this case, I'm actually going to say the ID is red, because that gives that that item, and just that one item, not any other H2s in the document, not anything else with the class green, but that one specific heading, I can refer to it in my style sheet using this hash mark and the name of the ID. If I, instead of saying red, I said my first heading, which is my other ID, and I'll save it. Let's reload. It hopped, because of course now the ID that I'm referring to is my the one that I had in my H1. The ID is my first heading. And again, I can only have an ID once in a document. Okay? I can't have two things in the same document that have the same ID. IDs are generally used not in a basic HTML document. IDs are really powerful when they're used along with JavaScript. JavaScript can locate an element based on its identifier and change the style or class of it. So if you have seen anything that has a lot of dynamic content that changes, one example would be our mapping. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of how IDs work. So in this case, if I click on this particular item, that particular image had an ID associated with it, so the JavaScript knew which thing I was clicking on and knew how to change the box that was around that particular image yellow, and how to then go over here and associate it with a particular item on the map. Okay? That was all made possible by the use of IDs, so that we give the JavaScript, which is the way we do dynamic things in our web browser, we have to give the JavaScript some idea of where particular things are located on a page, and the only way that we can do that is by giving them identifiers, or not the only way, but the easiest way that we can do that is by giving all of the items on our page that we need to access an identifier that allows that script to easily locate that item and do whatever manipulation it needs to do with that item. Okay, so that's usually when identifiers are used. It would be really uncommon for you to need to use identifiers in a normal website. But if you're working in a style sheet and you see that hash mark, the pound, that I want you to understand what it means. And what it means is that a specific element on the page with a particular identifier is going to have some special formatting associated with it. Okay? So that's how we apply classes. I'll review again. We can do it through an element. We can do it through a class name, which has a dot in front of it, and then the name of the class. We can do it through what are called pseudo elements or pseudo classes, which have this colon, okay? And usually those are very weird, actually. They'll do everything from, when you hover over something, or you can even do things like say, I want the first item to be one way and the second item to be another way. That's all done with pseudo elements and pseudo classes. If you see people with alternating table rows that might go gray, white, gray, white, gray, white, that's the kind of thing that you can do with those pseudo elements and pseudo classes. So if you see a colon, that's what it's for. And finally, if you see a hash mark, that means that they're referring to a very specific item in the page that has a unique identifier. And that bit of styling only applies to that one specific element that has that identifier. Whereas a class name, you can apply as many times as you want throughout a document. And every time you apply it, it would have the same effect, assuming that it didn't have a class name in front of it that meant that it only applied to that particular class. So if I made everything in my document have the class green, then the entire document would be green. I can do that. I can say, okay, I want the headings to be green, and the paragraphs all to be green, and I want my list item to be green as well. And everything's green. Okay? So class you can apply as many times as you need to, and unless otherwise specified, you can also apply it to any kind of element in the document. It's not specific to a heading or a paragraph unless you make it specific to a heading or a paragraph. So the final thing we're going to get into with style sheets is what you can do. Again, the advantage of using an HTML editor is it can help you to remember what all of the various options are, because obviously trying to remember the hundreds of possible things that you can do with a style sheet is practically impossible. But you might remember, oh, I can do a bunch of different things with the font. So you can start typing font and see what's possible. Font family, font size, font stretch, font style, font variant, font weight. Oh, font weight. Okay, well, let's see what font weight does. So font weight, as you can see, when I hit my colon, it tells me, specifies the weight of the font. Not very helpful. In this case, font weight is how bolded it is. So if I scroll down all the various options, they have some really specific options about weight, which are numeric options, 100 through 900, but they also have relative ones like bold, bolder, light, lighter, normal, and so on. So if I wanted all my headings to be bolder, headings are already bold, so that does very little. If I say I want, let's see, let's do a class called bold class. And we'll add that font weight bolder that we just saw. And if I have a paragraph that I wanted to be bolder, I could say class equals bold class. And you'll see it's going to bold that entire paragraph. Okay? So again, what you're focusing on is the structure of the document. And in most cases, it's best to have really general styles that apply to the whole document, or your document starts to look messy the way that this one does now with 500 different styles, and some of it bold and bigger and different fonts. If you're applying it on a big level, just that, this is the text, the font that I want for the entire document, this is the way that I want all the headings to look, and so on, then you get nice, consistent results. But the bottom line is you do have control at whatever level that you want, either specific elements or across the whole thing. So I gave one idea of the font weight. I also have things like the width of the element is often the case. So if you wanted if you created that table that we made earlier, and you wanted it to be a specific width, you can specify that in your style sheet. There are many elements that allow for a width. Really, frankly, you can just scroll through and see what all of the options are. So another example is text decoration. You'll frequently see people who have their links without underlines. So how does that work? Well, what they do is they take their anchor class, which represents a link, and they say, I want the text decoration to be none. And that is all that's required to take the lines off of your link. So I'll make myself a link. Paragraph. Okay. You'll see that there's no underline on my link. Probably you've all seen cases where there's no underline, but when you put your mouse over it, the underline appears. Let's try that. We would do that using our hover pseudo class that we saw earlier. And when we say when we hover over it, we want the text decoration to be an underline. I reload my page. Now when I put my mouse over it, as soon as I put my mouse, I get an underline. But it doesn't have to be as simple as an underline. Let's say that instead of having an underline when I put my mouse over it, I want to do something a little fancier. I want to change the color of the background to a light gray. So I'll do nice light gray. Now, when I put my mouse over, you'll see that the background color changes. And that's exactly the technique that we've used here, okay, to make our menu change color when we put our mouse over it. Right? Let's say I want to go even further, and I want all of my anchor tags to have a border around them. We'll have let's make them look like a button. That sounds good. So we'll do an outset border with a width of, we'll do a medium thickness to begin with. Okay, so now it looks like a button, and when I put my mouse over it, that button highlights. Okay, so instantly I changed what is just a regular link into something that looks like a button. And I've done it all with style sheets. And every single link I make in this case, in the entire document, is all going to look like that, like a button. If I decide that this text is too squished inside this button, I can access the padding element. And I can say I want the padding to be 10 pixels around in all directions. And I'll reload it, and suddenly I have a great big button with lots of space around it. And I can go on and on. The basic point that I'm trying to make here is you have the control to do all the formatting that you need within your style sheet, whether you create it or whether you get someone with the expertise to create it, and then the only thing that you have to worry about is creating your content. Because you can use that style sheet over and over and over and over again, and in fact just modify it in a minor way, where if you'd received this style sheet and you said, the padding on those images is 10 pixels and that's much too big, I'm going to change it to 5, you don't have to have any specific skill to be able to go in and see that you want to change something that has padding of 10 into a padding of 5. Once it's already there, it's very easy to go in and modify it. And that's part of why we do the example style sheets for the print report, is so that you can save them, go in and modify them, and not have to know all of the things that you can do, but rather look at what's already there as an example and just make slight modifications to those things. We're basically done. This was just to be a really quick introduction to you of what CSS does. If you want to do something prolonged where we actually learn all of the specific kinds of CSS properties that you might be interested in doing, we can do that. But right now I just wanted you to have an understanding of what CSS is and what it's for and the kinds of things that you can do. With an HTML editor like this, it's going to be able to give you some examples that you can scroll through, and frankly, just experiment. As I've been doing here, I can just pick things, and if you want to know, okay, what does margin do? You can frankly just pick it. It'll tell you what it means as you start typing, okay? And often it'll give you examples. In this case, it doesn't. Let's say I want a margin of 15 pixels. Let's see what that does. I just try it. In this case, margin is the padding all around an element, whereas padding is the margin inside, okay? So inside the box. I've spoken many times about how all HTML elements, that some of them are containers, and that and all you're doing when you add padding or a border or a margin is you're changing the properties of that container. So if I add a border to my container, I'm literally bordering, I'm showing you what the outline of the container is. If I change the padding of the container, I'm changing how much space is between the container and its contents. If I'm changing the margin, then what I'm doing is I'm changing how much space is outside the container, so around that container that has the element, as opposed to the padding, which is the space inside the container. Okay? And borders, I mean, there's a million of them. You can do dashed, you can do dotted, you can do just a zillion. So all kinds of things like that. You can even use CSS to hide things. You can actually hide elements by default. So they're in your page, but you can't see them. And why on earth would we want to do that? Well, this actually comes into play again with more sophisticated things like what we do with our mapping. We hide, the way that we would show and hide the map or elements on the map, all of these things are done with JavaScript, taking away or adding the visibility style, or in this case we use something called display none, which actually determines whether or not someone using the site can see it. It allows us to hide information in the page so that if we have to do, keep some kind of information in order to say, know where a position is on the map, that we're able to hide that information so that it's there for us to access, but the person who's viewing the page can't see it. In this case, I showed you how to make something invisible, but you'll see that the spot where it used to live is still there. If I make yet a different kind of change and I say display none, that doesn't just make it invisible, that literally makes it behave as if it was not there at all. So you see, even the space where that used to live is gone. One of the really cool things that we can do is you can actually do things where, I put my mouse over this and it makes the visibility of something else come up. There's all kinds of really amazing things you can do, and it's only using really simple instructions with CSS. So at this point, it's open to you if you have any questions about what I've covered today. I was really trying to do an overview, and then the material I'll provide you with will be reference material, and again, that will include a reference to the W3 schools, which I showed you earlier, which is an excellent reference to see what all the different tags are. So it'll tell you what are headings, paragraphs, what are links, images, and how do they work, how do I do tables, lists, and so on. This is all you need, and just building up little bits at a time with what you're comfortable with. In no time you'll be able to do most of the things that you would want to do. So, any questions? No? Okay. I think the only other thing that we had wanted to sort of highlight to you was our understanding that right now your website is hosted on your internal network.
I found out Atomic North is hosting it, but they have to set me up a folder.
Okay.
So that we can put in the PDFs and then link into there. I just asked them that yesterday, I guess, to get that. So.
Okay. Okay. So, you're now familiar with how to get your files to your site?
No, not yet.
Okay. So to explain, normally the way that works is through FTP, File Transfer Protocol. So in most cases, that is how someone who is working on a website gets their files from their local computer to the final destination on the internet. All right? Because usually that site is hosted remotely, and that's the access that's normally given by the service provider or you to get your files to their final destination. Okay? If you do your uploads by FTP, there are a lot of free clients to help you do that. The one that we use is FileZilla. There are some service providers that don't offer FTP. They might offer SFTP or some other kind of service for getting the files up. So FTP isn't a guarantee, but the vast, vast majority of service providers, that is how they provide access to get your files from your computer to their final location. Because, of course, that, with website updating in particular, that is the final piece. It's not good enough to be able to edit your file. You have to be able to get it where it's going to live. And whether you're wanting to link to your file from your CARC database or update your existing website or whatever the case, even link to documents from within your records, you have to have a spot to post them. I mean, that is basic. So everyone needs to know, how do I get the files to their location? You need to decide where different kinds of files are going to live. And I do recommend that you have, a PDF folder, an images folder, a style sheet folder, and so on. And if you do have special projects, you may want to have one folder for each of those special projects, but everyone needs to know where each kind of information lives, and you need to know how to get it to there. But one of the things that will be in the document I'm sending you is you have to know who's in charge of each kind of file and keep up to date. Because if you have your own local copy of the file and you're editing it and you send it in, and someone down the office also has their own copy of that file and they make their own changes and they don't get your changes first, then they will overwrite your changes and kablooey. So normally the protocol is, before you update a file, you first have to go and get the most recent copy of it. And there's all kinds of different ways that people manage, we call it configuration management, but basically there are many, or revision control, there are many different ways that people choose to make sure that they're working in the most recent copy, but you need to know what method you're going to use. So whether that be every time I'm going to edit a file, I first go get the existing one off the website, and then I edit it, and then I put it back, or we all work off the same copies of the file on our local network, and then those get updated to the site so that you know that if you're all working on a file that it's the same most up-to-date copy. It doesn't matter what way you choose, but everyone has to be on board with doing it the same way. Because otherwise you're just going to blow each other's work away. And what a waste of time that would be. So if you need help deciding on what the best method is, just talk to me, but make sure you have a method. The method isn't as important as whether or not everyone knows the method and follows it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
I hope that didn't, I hope that was useful, didn't blow you away too much. It's hard to cram it in 6 hours.
Lots of information, but useful. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So we'll get the recording to you. We will. I'll give you that. The PDF is basically this. When I used to do people's websites the zillion years ago, I would always train them to update it themselves. So what I have is, you know, what I used to give people when I would run their training sessions to update their sites. And I'm just updating it a little bit because I mean I haven't run a session in a while. And I'll give you that so you actually have something on paper. And again, that site is a really good long-term reference for you. If you don't like Komodo Edit, lots and lots of other options available, so don't feel stuck using it if you find that it doesn't work well for you. That was just one that we found that we felt was both free and reasonably good.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, and if you decide that you want more information, say on CSS in the future, where it's just a dedicated amount of time learning all the different techniques with CSS, we can do that in the future.
Okay, perfect.
Okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Kate.
All right, thanks.
Much appreciated,
Bye.
Kate. Cheerio. Bye-bye.